Educational GMAT. Your partner in your GMAT journey.
Total museums are this actually is not difficult at all. So again, this is a kind of very standard notation, friends. Notice for every column you have this symbol, which indicates that you can actually sort by any column. All right. So it does come in handy if you try to understand, at least have a broad understanding of what the table is. For example, in Estonia, there are a total of 224 museums, right? We're talking about museums here. And out of these 224 museums, 163 are public ownership and 61 are private, right? So if you add this, right, 163 plus 61, that will come out to be 224. Similarly, 203 plus 196 will come out to be 399 and so on. Now, out of these total museums, total number of museums, 67 are related to architecture, art, and history. Okay. So select true. Now here, select true if the statement means this statement. If the statement can be verified as true based on the information in the table. Can this statement be verified as true based on the data presented in the table? That's what the question is asking for. Okay, let's look at the first one. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? Okay, all right. The proportion of museums in France, related to architecture, art, or history. So France is obviously this, is greater than the proportion of museums in Netherlands devoted to art, architecture, and history. Siddhant, how did you do this real quickly? Proportion is what we are talking about, so it should not be difficult. Please go ahead, Siddhant. How did you approach this?
So for France, I divided 780 by the total number of
Very
museums.
nice. And that's pretty much the only way to do this. We are talking about proportion of museums in France. So these are the total number of museums in France, and out of these the total number of museums, 780 are related to architecture, art, or history. So proportion of museums in France related to art, architecture, and history would be how much? What would be the proportion? 780 divided by 1173. So this is where obviously the calculator that you have at your disposal would come in handy. So if I do the calculation, it's like 0.66. So in France, 0.66 is the proportion of museums related to architecture, art, or history. We would find the similar statistic for Netherlands. So in Netherlands, how do we find the proportion again? 498 divided by 775. So 498 divided by 775, that comes out to be 0.64. So clearly, France has a greater proportion than Netherlands. And this is exactly what the question is asking for. Is this proportion greater for France than for Netherlands? And the answer would be true, which is the exact answer that Siddhant gave us. Okay. Now, again, okay, all right. How about this one? Ratio of public museums to private museums. So we are talking about public museums to private museums. Public to private. Okay. Public to private, right? This is private. So public to private museums is greatest for Estonia. Public to private, which means we are essentially looking at what kind of computation. This is to this, like public is to private. How did you approach this, Siddhant?
It's visible like 220 by 1 is the height. So
Excellent. Excellent. So theoretically, you would wonder whether you have to do this divided by this divided by this, and so on for every country. That obviously would be very overwhelming, right? So then a bit of an observation helps. And what Siddhant is telling us that looking at the data, it is very clear that in Croatia, there are 220 public and only one private museum. So public is to private, that ratio is 220 for Croatia. And clearly, no other country will come anywhere even close to this. So the question is asking us, is this ratio greatest for Estonia? No, it is very clear looking at the data that this ratio is actually the greatest for Croatia. So false. Excellent. Now let's look at the third one. This one can be tricky. There is a positive correlation between number of public museums and number of visitors per year. So just so that you guys are refreshed in terms of the concept of positive correlation. So if we are talking about for example, if we were to given on the basis of this table, if we were to draw a graph between number of public museums and number of visitors, right? And if the relationship between these two variables is represented by this kind of a line, right? That would mean a positive correlation, which would basically mean that as the number of public museums increase, the number of visitors also increases. So that would be a positive correlation. Now, first things first. First things first. Since we are talking about number of public museums and number of visitors, what would you do on the exam? What would you do on the exam since you have to find this correlation? Now, number of public museums is this column, right? So what you would do is first you would sort on this column, right? So that the data in this column is in ascending sequence. Now, incidentally, it happens that the data that is presented to us is already in ascending sequence for public museums, right? So now, when would the correlation between this and this column, when would it be positive? Notice this is already in increasing order. If number of visitors per year is also in increasing order, then we would know that there is a positive correlation. Are we clear, guys? Now, here is where the trick lies. If we analyze this data, how much is this? 2 million. This is 11 million. So we are doing good so far, right? Increasing. Now 2, 11, and then we again have 2. That's a sharp dip. Then we have 10, 19, 12. I'm talking about millions. 12, 56, 40. So to the naked eye, this would look like it's all over the place. It would look like it's all over the place. Now, here is something that I want, because positive and negative correlations are tested very frequently. Here is something that I want you to remember. I did mention this earlier as well. How many countries are represented? 8. For finding the correlation, what you always do is, notice once you have sorted on one column, what you do is divide these 8 pieces of data into top 50% and bottom 50%. So since there are 8 pieces of data, so you divide it into top 4 and bottom 4. Then what you do is find out the approximate average for the top 4, approximate average for the bottom 4. Approximate. All right. So when I say approximate, for example, in this case, it would be 2 million, right? So 2 plus 11 plus 2 plus 10 divided by 2, right? And for the bottom 4, it would be 19 plus 12 plus 56 plus 40 divided by 4, right? Divided by 4 because we have 4 pieces of data, correct? So for the top 4, how much is the average? 13, 15, 25, around 6, right? Around 6. Bottom 4, if you look at the bottom 4, clearly it is significantly more than 6, right? You don't even have to do the actual calculation. It's clear that it's significantly more than 6. So the average of the bottom 4 is markedly and significantly more than the average of the top 4, which means there is a positive correlation. So you don't need to get too hung up by individual drops and increases. So you just have to look at the overall trend, and the trend is that of a positive correlation. Are we clear? All right. So